up? What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I am Dave Smith. I am rolling solo for this episode. Thank you guys so much for joining. I really appreciate it. I've got some stuff that's on my mind that I thought I would rant about today, and it's something that I've been, I've talked a bit about this over the last week, and we talked a bit on the members only stream about it yesterday. By the way, for those of you guys who don't know, we do a fourth episode every week that's just for subscribers over at partoftheproblem.com. If you'd like to get that, go sign up over there. We would very much appreciate that. Helps the show out. But so we were talking a bit yesterday about the firing of Jimmy Kimmel, and a little bit of a larger conversation about free speech. And there's been, over the last week, there's been all types of these topics have been coming up with first of all, the fact that Charlie Kirk stood for free speech so much, and that he was executed for that, and in many ways for that. And then there's been conversations about people getting fired for the TikTok videos that they make celebrating it. And now this Jimmy Kimmel one has really been kind of the biggest example in all of this. And then there's another interesting angle because, of course, the chairman of the FCC really blatantly threatened ABC before they fired Jimmy Kimmel. And so it just adds in, other elements. And now there's a big conversation raging about, right-wing cancel culture, free speech, government intervention, hypocrisy of the people who have been opposed to cancel culture now celebrating it. And there's a lot of different people are giving their takes on this. And I just want to say, I think I have a little bit of a different take the more I've been thinking about this than anyone else I've seen so far. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I think than anyone I've seen so far. In other words, this rant is guaranteed to satisfy no one, but I still think it's important. So let me go in saying that. And I would preface the entire thing by saying I'm not, like, on this episode, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm not trying to, as I often am, but on this one, I'm not trying to convince you that I'm right and you're wrong, or this is the correct way to think about it and this is the incorrect way to think about it. I'm not trying to sell you on anything today. I'm trying to give you something to play with, and give you something to grapple with, and kind of maybe, perhaps think about these things in a different way. It's kind of interesting, I guess, for libertarians like myself, when there are these moments when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it seems like normies care about talking about our values. This almost always only happens when liberals are attempting to use your own values against you. So, when this happens a lot, like whenever there's like a liberal who's threatened by cancel culture, they immediately go, oh, free speech, you don't believe in government intervention or something like that. It's in the same sense, like when they're standing up for abortion, they say my body, my choice. They make like a libertarian appeal, but they only care about it as far as it serves their interests. And then obviously they will abandon that. But, it's you'd literally, I remember hearing pro-choice activists say my body, my choice as they supported vax mandates in the middle of the pandemic. It doesn't bother them that they're being hypocritical, because they are just attempting to manipulate you. And I guess I would start by saying this, kind of like to zoom out about the moment that we're in right now, which is particularly what's kind of appalling to me about the liberals who are like trying to needle right-wingers for celebrating Jimmy Kimmel being fired, or for celebrating, even just people who got lost their job for making TikTok videos and stuff like that. And I don't know. I think it's worth saying at the beginning of this that, like, the way I see things in the big picture here is that the most remarkable part of, say, the last week, let's say since Charlie Kirk's assassination, the most amazing part of all of this is that there's been no violent retaliation. And that's really great. Like, it's really, really good. That was like the most important, it was the most dangerous part of this moment, and the biggest potential for disaster and escalation. And there's been no retaliation. And right-wing America, broadly speaking, deserves a lot of credit for that. A lot of credit for that. There's been a lot of influential right-wing people who have encouraged calm and discouraged any type of retaliation. And there's also just, obviously, like, Christianity is a major force in the right wing in the United States of America, and whatever else, is everybody involved in not having a violent response to this deserves a lot of credit. And so, like, in this moment when there's like tremendous anger, tremendous frustration, tremendous pain on the right wing in America, the fact that there hasn't been any type of violent response, it should be, I think, applauded. And instead, the reaction is like to be mad at them for celebrating the fact that this disgusting Jimmy Kimmel got kicked off of the air. And I just think that's an unreasonable, like, standard to place on right wing America. I mean, look, dude, when George Floyd got killed, there were billions of dollars in property damage done as a response, and dozens of people were killed, and hundreds at least were assaulted and, injured and things like that. And there's a lot of violence in response to that. There's been none in response to Charlie Kirk. And Charlie Kirk was not like a career criminal who died by some freak thing where, I mean, however you feel, I know we're not even going to get into that. I know there's the competing autopsy reports and there's all these other things, and you could feel however you feel about a cop putting his knee on a guy's neck and all of that. But, like, if a cop did that to 100 people in a row, it is unlikely that anyone would die from it. Like, it's a little bit of a freak thing that, like, that would end up killing you. Again, not saying you should do that or nothing like that. Not saying I want anyone to do that to me or I want to do that to anyone else. But, like, what you had was like a career criminal, a man who had, like, what was it? He had, like, robbed a pregnant woman or something like that. And, he had, like, no, okay. But by the way, none of that means you should be mistreated by a cop or anything. But, like, the point is that Charlie Kirk never did nothing like that. Charlie Kirk was just a Christian who liked to go to college campuses and talk. And he didn't, like, happen to die by something that normally won't kill you. He was executed by something that will kill you 100% of the time. And so, like, just saying, the fact that there's been no violence in response, you'd think that ought to be something that would, like, be at the top of everyone's list. Like, okay, that's the most important thing. Kudos for that. But that's not what's going on here. And instead, this seems to be an attempt at a rallying cry of, like, oh, Jimmy Kimmel was a victim, he's a free speech warrior who was, like, persecuted for, standing up to the regime or something like that. And like, Stephen Colbert, he said the other day, we are all Jimmy Kimmel now, which is really, I mean, there is something to that. Like, I was making this point on the members only stream yesterday, but, like, that's your comment? We're all Jimmy Kimmel now? Not we're all Charlie Kirk? We're all Jimmy Kimmel? Like, you see that as the most egregious violation of free speech in the last week? Because I thought it was the guy who went to college campuses to talk about ideas and got executed. Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this season on Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. It's very easy to play. You pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you're correct, you could win some serious cash. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about like how I think about these things. And again, this is like when I was saying, I'm not like trying to sell you. I'm just trying to give you this to kick around and see what you think. Because often I think for people like in the position I'm in, whatever that is, podcaster or pundit, commentator, oftentimes we tend to think that where our views on policy are the most important thing. Whereas I think that typically for podcasters or pundits or whatever, actually just like the way you're thinking about things is the most important thing. The kind of the way you're thinking about things, the way you talk about things with other people, the way you get people thinking about things is actually much more important than even like what policy you stand for. Because like if we're being honest here, we're not in the business of making policy. That doesn't really matter, but we are in the business of getting people to think about things. And so like that's actually what you're doing here. So in some ways that's more important. Now, by the way, to protect my libertarian street cred here, and I don't, I mean this, I'm not saying it just to protect that, but just to be clear here, I'm against the FCC existing. I'm against the FCC threatening companies. I think it was I think it was counterproductive and just wrong and incredibly stupid for the FCC chair to start threatening ABC the way that he did there. And I think in some ways it takes away what otherwise would be a win for the right wingers. It's almost like cheating at a game that you can win straight up. And so like you're in a sense you're like, oh, but if I cheat, then I just took that away from myself from getting the clean win. And now everyone can see that and point to the fact that you cheated and it almost doesn't count in the same way. You should have just let me get the win. And that's kind of how I feel about this whole thing. But I don't necessarily agree with some other libertarians who, in a sense, are arguing like that Jimmy Kimmel's free speech is being violated here. And this might upset some people when I say this, but I'll kind of try to explain my thinking about this once again. I'm not exactly trying to convince you. I'm more just trying to, let's think about things like this together. But I would say that that Jimmy Kimmel is in effect, in function, he's a part of the regime. And he has been for a long time now. And I just view things differently. I don't view the regime as having rights the way all the rest of us do. I think that like almost if you could imagine if you kidnapped a child, right? And then someone stole that child from you. Like, have you been victimized? Like, obviously the answer is no, right? Like, even though like a child was taken from you, it wasn't your child to begin with. And so you're not the victim here. You joined the criminal kidnapper class, and now someone else in the criminal kidnapper class out-criminaled you, but I don't care. Like, you're not a victim anymore in this game because you already crossed that line. And in the same sense, where like, if you were somebody who say like against murder, as most of us should be, but like, it's like if the Bloods and the Crips start killing each other, it's not the same thing as if the Bloods just start killing innocent people. Like that's different. Two gangs fighting it out is a little bit different than gangs terrorizing innocent people. And I almost kind of view things like that. Like in a sense where this is two gangs who I don't like, who are fighting it out. But in that case, you want to think more about being strategic than any moral, any moral consideration. If there's two groups of killers who are killing each other, and like say one of the groups of killers has vowed that, once they're done killing this gang, they'll stop the killing. And the other one says, as soon as we're done killing this gang, we're going to kill all the rest of you guys. So we might root for this one gang. Because like there's no principle really involved anymore. It's all killers at this point. And I don't just like, I'm not just randomly assigning like regime to Jimmy Kimmel. I think he joined the regime a long time ago. And in fact, I think that for anybody, not just libertarians, but for anybody who's like opposed to the current regime, it's important to think about things this way. I remember So this must man, this must be back in like 2010 or something like that. It's like shortly after I got into all this political stuff, and the Ron Paul revolution blew my mind, and I started like going down the rabbit hole and reading all types of radical political books and stuff. So it's like right in the first couple years while I was in that, and there was like it was the School Sucks podcast. Brett, oh man, I apologize. Because I really liked those guys. I think they stopped doing the podcast, but it was Brett Verratti or something. I'm blanking. I'm butchering your last name. I apologize, Brett, if you're listening, and I know Brett. But so they had this. There was this show called the School Sucks podcast, and this was early in the internet. This is whatever, 15 years ago or something, and maybe even a little more. I might be a little off in these dates, but it's around there, like somewhere around 2010. But they had like a viral video, which I don't even know, like, if I don't even know what the numbers were back then, but it might have been like, the YouTube and all these things were just not as big. And so the video might have had a couple 100,000 views on it, but we were all like, yeah, oh my God, this thing is taken off. So many people are here. It's just like was a different world. But this video blew my mind, and it did that. It did this for a lot of people because it was like a little viral sensation. But I remember like being so interested in this, and then it was one of those moments where I was like, wait, that can't be true. And then I was like, I gotta go read about this. And then it turns out it's all true. But anyway, so the I've probably mentioned this over the years because I find this stuff so interesting. This was like a real like red pill moment for me when I didn't know anything about this. But basically what he was talking about was how I think the subject of the video was like about his interest in the rise of the Nazis. And he was like, how the hell did this happen to Germany? And like, okay, there's all these parts to the story, but here's one part that rarely ever comes up. And so about 100 years before the rise of the National Socialists, Workers' Party, it was the Prussian Empire. This is the geographic and cultural precursor to Nazi Germany. This was the Prussian Empire was the Second Reich. So Adolf Hitler is trying to start the Third Reich. This is the Second Reich that came immediately before, the Second Great German Empire. And the Prussians were having a big problem where their soldiers, their king's army or conscripted, soldiers, they would do these crazy things like run away or like piss themselves and then get killed on the battlefield or refuse to fight, like all these different things. And this was like a major problem for the Prussian elites. And they ultimately came up with a solution for the problem. And their solution was that they would start what became known as school. And the idea was that they would get your kids at a really young age and school them to be loyal subjects of the king. And so by the time they were 17, 18 years old, they had been totally propagandized by the government, and they would be loyal subjects to the king and go fight in his wars and not think about silly little things like themselves, whether they wanted to do this. And it was, by all accounts, largely successful. So successful that it was exported to the United States of America. And this is why we still call it school. And you like, I don't know if you've ever thought about that before, but you're like, why is there all these German sounding names? Why am I dropping my 5-year-old off at kindergarten? It's like, okay, because that's where it comes from. And Horace Mann, who was the godfather of American education, he even explicitly wrote about this, that we are adopting the Prussian system because it's so effective for the Prussians. And like he had some line in there about like, well, they use it for autocratic means, but we will use it for good Republican, something like that. But I mean, look, if you just look at it for what it is, and this is why it was like kind of a powerful red pill moment. I mean, at least especially in like 2010, to me, it sure was, that you're like, oh my God, this whole thing is like a brainwashing, mechanism. And if libertarians are going to conceive of like the existence of the state You can't not think about that too. Like, oh my God, this is a whole huge other component of it. Tom Woods had this great it was like a speech. It was right around that time too. Must have been around 2010. But it was the first time I ever heard him where he used this analogy where he was just talking about like government school and like think about it. And by the way, they didn't call it, education centers. They called it school. Like what they're doing there is not educating. They're schooling you. So Tom Woods, he said it like this. He goes, this was his thought experiment was he goes, just imagine that Walmart ran all the schools. Okay. And so like the idea was just like, imagine it's anyone except the government. Imagine a private company was running the schools. And he goes, okay, so like Walmart is in charge of all the schools. And the first thing they have you do, they take your kids from like age 5 to 18. And the first thing they have to do every single morning is pledge allegiance to Walmart. And then in the classroom, there would be pictures of all the Walmart CEOs all around the classroom. And they would kind of like make up all of these stories like, the first Walmart CEO was such a pure man that he never told a lie. One time he chopped down a cherry tree and he said, Dad, I did it. I could not lie to you. This is like obviously made up shit about what heroes and wonderful people they were. Oh, this Walmart CEO was the great emancipator and this Walmart CEO. Meanwhile, if you look back at it, you find out like a lot of them killed a whole lot of people and did a lot of real messed up stuff. And in fact, they all told a lot of lies. But I'm just saying, if you looked at this as it was Walmart, and Walmart was just praising Walmart, and Walmart was making young children pledge allegiance to Walmart, we would all immediately look at it and be like, this is sick. This is sick cult-like behavior. Okay? But that just is normal to all of us when it comes to the state, because that's just the way it's supposed to be done. And it's like over the last decade or so, a lot of people would start coming to this conclusion that they're like, oh my God, public schools have been turned into indoctrination centers. And it's like, no, they have not been. They have not been turned into indoctrination centers. They have switched up the indoctrination curriculum to something that is more particularly egregious to you, and understandably so. But nothing's changed. They're just indoctrinating them. Like that's been the goal the whole time. And, so like this is something that has to be understood along with kind of the more fundamental 101 libertarian understanding of what the government is, which you would think is like a pretty important thing to understand. That I think liberalism in many ways is like allergic to this understanding, but it's a pretty basic, it's like the foundational libertarian insight about politics. And it's not really particularly libertarian in nature. It's just objectively true. But, and this is why, like when people are having these conversations and they're like, well, it's different if private people do it or the government is involved or blah, it violates the First Amendment if the government is involved, but it doesn't violate the First Amendment if the government's not involved or any of this. But it's like, I think very few of the people who are in this broader conversation have really examined like the foundational building blocks of all of this. So like number one, like what is the government? What is the state? And as libertarians know well, right, there only is one coherent objective definition for government. And what government is a group of people who hold a legal monopoly on the use of aggressive violence. That really is the only definition of a government that actually describes what it is. You can do pretty much anything a government can do except the aggressive violence. You can even, in most parts of this country, use violence to defend yourself. You just can't do it aggressively. You can't use aggression, and they can. That's the difference. I mean, you could write laws. You could even, come up with a tax code. You just can't enforce it. They can enforce it. If you were to do what the government does, it would be considered theft, murder, threats, imprisonment, kidnapping, torture, when they do it, it's called war, taxation, collateral damage, detainment, official letters from a court. But if you did it, it was and so okay, so this is essentially like just what the nature of government is. Now, to be a libertarian is to reject that, and to embrace that is to be something else. But to understand that is just to get things correct. That just objectively is what the government does. And if any private individual did what the government does, they would be arrested and spend a long, long time in jail, if not get the death penalty. And so when you're talking about the government, you're talking about, an instrument of force. Now, there is a tremendous tendency, particularly amongst liberals, to pretend that government is something else, that government is the referee in the game, or that government is all of us collectively, or that government is the nation. But none of that's true. Like, that's all objectively not true. You could just disprove it by thinking it through. But then, so Murray Rothbard, in his phenomenal work, Anatomy of the State, which I highly recommend everyone read if you haven't already. It's like 60 pages long or something. You can read it in one sitting. It's a great little pamphlet, booklet, essay type thing. And the point that he makes in this wonderful book is that essentially the government is a gang that took over and gained legitimacy in the popular imagination of its people. And that's essentially all the government is. But as he even gets into in that book, it's more than just the actual government. And he gets into like the marriage between the government and the intellectual class, and how there's this like huge reinforcement mechanism between the two. And like the intellectual class doesn't really, let's just say they don't really command much value in a true marketplace. Like in a true marketplace, there's just not that much demand for people who are like, I go and read books or something like that. Or I teach sociology or something like that. You probably only need that many, and there's not that many people willing to pay that much for it. And you're just not going to become a multimillionaire off that. However, when the government decides that, like, they'll build public universities and libraries and back student loans and all this, they kind of make a market for these intellectuals that's much more lucrative than the market otherwise would be. And in return, the intellectuals find a way to justify the role of the state. Now, much like school itself, the role that these intellectuals are playing is essentially brainwashing, propagandizing the country into accepting the regime's policy. And in this sense, thinking of them as separate from the state is substantially less helpful and accurate than thinking of them as all part of one apparatus. This is what Curtis Yarvin, who I think it was probably around this time too, probably around 2010. I didn't read him till much later, but around that time, I think, is when he came up with his term was the cathedral. And the cathedral encompassed like the actual government, all the shadow parts of the government, but it also incorporated corporate media, academia, Hollywood, things like this, because they're all kind of used together. And so, for example, like take academia for a second. Like academia is, okay, many of the people who work at, say, private universities are not government employees, but the whole industry is a government program. The whole thing only exists because the government is backing the loans, or nowadays just giving the loans to the kids and then giving the legal protection to the school and then giving, like, it's all just this big government program that happens to end with everybody spouting approved government propaganda. If you think about it like this, right? There are, maybe this is a good way to look at it. So you remember when it came out that the NIH was funding gain of function research in the Wuhan lab in China? Well, it wasn't them, right? If you remember, it was a subsidiary. So like they gave a grant to a company, that company gave the money to the Wuhan lab. But you understand, I think all of us, like in effect, we should all feel comfortable in saying the NIH gave that money to the Wuhan lab. Because if you don't conceive of it that way, then all you're acknowledging is that all the government has to do is say, well, we gave it to all they have to do is have a private company do it. And then they get to say, what? That was done by a private company. It wasn't done by us. But we'd all kind of recognize that that's pretty ridiculous, right? I mean, imagine, let's say, let's say that there was a secret act passed by our government to create another government department, but it was a secret government department. And so they didn't tell the public that that was a government department. Would that make it any less of a government department? In other words, like, does it matter what we call it? Or does it matter what the government calls it? Or does it matter like how they're acting? What function are they serving right now? And especially like something like the college campus stuff. Like, I mean, if you're being funded by the government, your whole industry is propped up by the government, and you're regurgitating the propaganda of the government. Okay, in some technical sense, you're a private person who isn't a government employee, but in a much more real sense, you are a part of the regime, and you should be regarded as such. And so, you know, look, I mean, because this is like how all types of things work. A great book on this to read is what's it called? Oh, damn it, am I going to blank on this? Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Great book. Where they talk all about like the private companies that the CIA uses to do so much of their dirty work. And if we're going to say that's not the government, then I don't know. It's like you're just giving the government an obvious end around. So there's no restrictions on government at all, because like this thing is obviously still a part of that. Like clearly, in the same way they say, this is what they say about the Federal Reserve. They say the Federal Reserve is private. What are you talking about? There's a private company that we created through an act of Congress. They just have the power to print the money. But I mean, what is that? Like, what if to use Walmart again, is that, let's say that Walmart was created by an act of Congress, and then every few years the president appointed the CEO of Walmart. Would you consider Walmart a private company at that point, or would you go, I think you're part of the government now, right? And the same with, look, it's true with all types of like weapons contractors, and I mean, like, what is the Brookings Institute? Is that just a private organization? Does it make any sense to think of them as such? What are they funded by? A mix of foreign governments and weapons manufacturers? And that makes a private company? Like, no, not really. Not in any true spirit, in any true sense of that term. And, you know, I think that, you know, another non-government or NGOs, right? So like NGOs, like, by the way, isn't it interesting that they have to, the first two, they have to say non-governmental? It's like, if you ever start a company, you probably wouldn't think that those need to be the first two words of your company, because it's actually non-governmental. So you don't need to say it, you know. And like, are these NGOs who, like, you know, let's say they take US taxpayer money and then they go, you know, to form like pro-democracy Ukrainian media companies that urge people to take to the streets to overthrow the Yanukovych government? Am I supposed to look at that George Soros NGO as just, oh, that's just the free market? And so, again, look, I do just think you come back to a thing where I'm not saying it's perfect, and obviously it's a little bit arbitrary in some of these cases, what exactly you consider the regime and what you do not consider the regime. But just for example, let's just say, just a hypothetical situation. Let's say that, let's just imagine in Washington, D.C., you had like a think tank that was funded by weapons manufacturers that was arguing for war. Now, I know that's crazy. We would never find that in the real Washington, D.C., but let's just say, hypothetically, there was a think tank that's funded by weapons companies, that's going to government to present policy papers saying why we need a big buildup in the defense budget. So here you have these weapons companies that are creatures of the taxpayer. They literally just sell their weapons to the US federal government that buys them with our money, right? With our money that they took from us by force. They create this weapons company. The weapons company creates a think tank or funds a think tank. The think tank is arguing for more of our money to be spent on, on weapons. Now, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, a president or a dictator or a politician, someone who's an official government, employee, says, I'm proposing a new law that you're not allowed to do that. Like, Mr. Think Tank guy, shut up. You're not allowed to write papers anymore that say you want a higher defense budget. Is it so obvious that the libertarian position and pure theory and morality is that that's a violation of free speech? It's like, I actually don't think so. I don't think so at that point. Now, I understand. I can hear the pushback already. Remember, I'm trying to get you to play with an idea. I'm not trying to sell you on anything. And people can say, well, that's not Jimmy Kimmel exactly. Okay. I think when you really at Jimmy Kimmel's level, and especially like through COVID, when he's at that position where he just decides, I'm going to stop being a comedian and I'm going to start being a mouthpiece for the regime. And I'm going to literally mock my fellow Americans, advocate that they don't get health care if they haven't gotten the COVID vax. Remember, what did he say? You can go die now, wheezy, or whatever his comments were. You do put yourself in a different category, in my opinion. Like, you made yourself part of the cathedral. And in the same sense that, like, if you were going to me, like, oh my God, there's like a strong man political leader is going up there and saying that these think tanks who are taking money from weapons companies and are advocating for more war, we're shutting them all down. And you would go, this is a violation of free speech. I don't know. I don't think so, actually. I think this is gangster shit. These are two gangs fighting, and I have every right to just like not care about that. And if you were to ask me, oh, Mr. Libertarian, I thought you liked free speech, you'd be like, well, I don't think you know what I mean? Like, I don't think any of this should exist. I don't think that weapons company should exist. I don't think that think tank should exist. And I don't think this politician should exist. But you know what? They all do. And so it's not so clear from first principles that I got to think that these members of the regime are citizens exercising their free speech. I just do not see it that way. And so I understand where people can disagree, and it's like I said, it is kind of arbitrary when exactly somebody becomes a member of the regime. And I guess to that I would kind of say, yeah, there are lines that are arbitrary that must be drawn in society. It is not like exactly clear when like the age of consent should you be allowed to have sex and drive a car at 18 or 19 or 20? I don't know, but there's got to be a line. And it seems somewhere around there seems just about right. I mean, I don't know. You could be like 8-year-olds can't be allowed to drive a car and 35-year-olds certainly have to be. Where do we draw that line exactly? I mean, you try to get it as close to right as you think. And I'm sure we could all, look at like some line and go, no, that's way too young. No, that's way too old. But you got to draw it somewhere. You have to, because otherwise you can't move forward. You can't have a society where children can operate vehicles, and you can't have a society where adults are not allowed to. So just for function, you have to draw the line somewhere. And yes, it's going to be somewhat arbitrary where you draw it. I think Jimmy Kimmel was way over the line of just being a member of the regime. I don't consider that speech rights anymore at that point. And so I'm not one of these people who's going like, oh my God, I have so much sympathy for Jimmy Kimmel because he's gotten his First Amendment rights violated or something like that. I don't think that's correct. I still think it's really, really stupid and a bad direction to go down. Now, so essentially, this is why I'm going to make nobody satisfied with this argument. I say all of that to say I still am. If you ask me what policy I support, I think it's just a disaster that the FCC chairman gave them that out. And look, like what I was saying before about how governments are gangs. I mean, look, what the FCC chairman did was some real gangster shit, right? He literally said to him, he goes, we could either handle this the easy way or the hard way. Like, you don't have to jump, you don't have to, it's not a crazy stretch to get from we could either handle things the easy way or the hard way to like gangster shit. That's what they were doing. Now, I don't think in this case, that's actually why Jimmy Kimmel got fired. I think Jimmy Kimmel got fired because a big corporation jumped on that opportunity. It kind of, with all the outrage against Jimmy Kimmel, it gave them like the perfect out. So you have all this outrage about the dumbass thing that he said. People are pissed off. You got these affiliates who are threatening. And then the FCC chair threatens and you go, perfect. Now we can dump this big contract, which wasn't justified anyway. But in the same sense of like the example that I've used before, and this is something I got to say, this is something that people really have a tough time with in political thinking. This is what I like to call the white men can't jump philosophy. But was that Rosie Perez, what she says in that movie, right? Because people do in politics, people have a tough time thinking in like second, third order effects. But anyway, to my point, right? Essentially where I'm at here is that this is no longer to me like a moral liberty issue. Like this is morally wrong for the government to get involved in this way. To me, these are different wings of the government fighting is essentially how I view this, which by the way, also happens all the time. People make a mistake and think of the state as a monolith. It's not. There's all types of examples throughout history where the State Department and the Defense Department are at odds. The CIA and the FBI have had a very contentious relationship. Obviously, there's different presidential administrations that have warred with each other, and there's beefs within administrations. Where just Kamala Harris, I think, just came out with a book, and there's all types of battles between the vice president's office and the president's office. So it's not. But I'm saying I think of this more as a feud between the CIA and the FBI. Is anyone's rights being violated? Like, I don't know. You're all in a constant perpetual state of violating people's rights. So I don't know. So it's not a moral issue. So then what it becomes is purely a strategic issue. And so purely on strategic grounds, it only hurt the right wing. Now, what I was saying before with the Rosie Perez thing is like people have a tough time understanding second and third order effects and like how things play out in the long run. It's much more challenging to try to look at that than it is to just go, what's the immediate next step? And so what Rosie Perez, right, her dumb line in White Men Can't Jump was sometimes when you win, you really lose. And sometimes when you lose, you really win. And sometimes when you tie, you actually win or lose. And sometimes when you win or lose, you actually tie. Anyway, the point kind of being that in this situation, Jimmy Kimmel was getting fucked up. He's already losing the fight. Like if you were in a big fight and you're just like dominating the opponent, you're going into the 12th round and you're up 11 rounds to nothing. And you're like, I'm just going to keep killing this guy. Do you want the referee to cheat for you at that point? No, it just robs your victory from you. It just gives them a talking point. Jimmy Kimmel was getting destroyed. His ratings have been tanking. The guy is a laughing stock. Nobody cares anymore. And he's just getting dunked on left and right because his point there was like the most dumbass bonehead point. Like it didn't even make any sense. His argument was, MAGA's trying to make it look like it wasn't one of their own. Like, no, they're not. It clearly wasn't. There's no evidence pointing to that. It's as silly as any of the other conspiracies. But like, think about how you totally just like take that victory away from yourself now because the dumbass fucking FCC chairman had to go threatening them, and now they can make it out to be a free speech issue. So it's just purely on like the strategy of it. This was a bad strategy. And I see people, there's a few things. Like I see a lot of people who understandably just want to celebrate this, and they're kind of like in this like, I don't care. You guys started playing this game, so we're going to start playing this game too. And I've heard a few, popular, people who I like, who have been making that attitude. That's right. We are hypocrites. We're being hypocritical now, and we are, violating free speech, and we're embracing cancel culture and all this stuff. And like, first of all, as I said before, with my cathedral regime worldview, I don't even think that's true. So I don't think there's any need to concede that you're being a hypocrite in this case. But on top of that, when people are going like, oh, Charlie Kirk, that's what he was doing. We tried it that way and you shot that guy in the neck. So now we're doing it this way. It's like, well, first of all, I don't think it's a great way to honor the guy's legacy to say we're going to reject everything that he stood for. And second of all, what you're leaving out of there is that we were finally winning. Like the anti-woke culture war has finally been paying off over the last few years. And a big part of why they were able to win is because they were able to make the principled argument and win a lot of people over based off that. And so if you do, even though I'm telling you that I don't actually view it as being such a simple free speech issue, it is going to be perceived that way by most people. And once you go, yeah, we're not being principled either, okay, well then now you no longer can persuade those people who are persuaded by principle. That's a big thing to keep in mind. It's important to keep in mind that we were winning. Like this battle, Jimmy Kimmel was losing. Charlie Kirk was winning. Charlie Kirk flipped the youth vote so much that it got Donald Trump elected and had him win the popular vote for the first time. After getting killed in that demographic, he's now winning that demographic. That demographic doesn't even know who Jimmy Kimmel is, by the way, because that's how much the old dinosaur media has been getting killed. And so it does, to me, this just feels like on one hand, it's like strategically, you're giving them a talking point and you're kind of snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory. Like this, you're already winning this. Just keep winning this game. I don't know, like, look, obviously for a lot of people out there, right? Like I was given the right wing credit for there being no retaliatory violence so far. Well, obviously to a lot of people, that would actually feel kind of good to just do that. Like in the short run, that might make you feel better. But I think most of us could see like, yeah, but in the long run, that's a disaster. In the long run, it's such a moral victory for the right wing that there was no violent response. And that's something that will persuade a lot of reasonable people to go like, yeah, you keep saying they're the bad guys, but actually they're the ones who really showed restraint here. Like that's how you win long term. And, I got to say there is this, and I understand it. I understand feeling this way, particularly after everything that's happened in the last, week, or I guess week and a day now. But there's like a temptation to feel like, hey, things have gotten so far that I don't want to hear these, I don't want to hear like, oh, we can't embrace this, or this could be used against us. This is already being used against us. And, this is one area where I really will defend the libertarians. And I think that they end up getting dismissed by right wingers. And I think, look, I'm a libertarian, but I think I'm the first to admit when there are areas where the libertarians are being goofy and the right wingers are actually making a point. This is one area where I really think it's like libertarians have consistently been proven right about this, and still their advice just never gets heard. But it really is true that you do not want to set precedents that this model is how things are going to work. The top-down government managing of these things, or government intervention in these issues, is just never ends up being a friend of right-wingers in the long run. Perhaps sometimes in the very short run. But, even if you think about the Bud Light boycotts or the Target boycotts or Elon Musk buying Twitter or any of these things, it was always market-based actions that ended up actually working to roll back some of this insanity. And, around, after 9/11 and in the next couple years, it was Ron Paul and the libertarians who were warning right-wingers against the creation of the Patriot Act and the Department of Homeland Security and the TSA and just the massive spying apparatus that was built up over the following decades. And right-wingers at the time were like, no, screw you, libertarian, pussies. We're doing this because we got a threat and we're going to go get that threat. We're going to go get the Muslims. And that entire apparatus ended up being turned on right-wing Americans. And all of them, the Department of Homeland Security decided that domestic terrorism was the biggest threat and that it was, MAGA Republicans were the domestic terrorists. You look at the way they went after the people on January 6th. And then there does seem to be some feeling amongst right-wingers where most of them would probably admit, yeah, you guys were right about that one. You guys were right. We should have listened to you when you said this will end up being weaponized against us. And then whenever the next time comes where libertarians are going, yeah, dude, but you don't want to do this because this could be weaponized against you. They go, oh, please, they just never say. But even if you feel like it's already being weaponized against us, things can get worse. I promise you, things can get much, much worse. And always think about that. Always think about whether this is really something that won't have like massive, counter reactions against us in the future. And so I just essentially feel that we're like in the marketplace of ideas. If there aren't restraints on us, we kill these guys every time. And, part of that is that you gotta, to win this fight, you gotta, and particularly when there's a crisis, this is what a lot of people really struggle with. But when there's a crisis, that's when you have to be at your most rational and stick to your principles the most. It's very important because these things are going to age a certain way. It's like, look, I guess I'm not alone in this because I saw also Nick Fuentes was also catching some flack from his audience, as I was, both for the same reason, because we both has said that there's no evidence to suggest that Israel killed Charlie Kirk. And it is really something, just like the way the lowbrow conspiratorial mind works, that everyone's going, Nick got the call too. Dave got the call. And now Nick got the call. And we're all, and whatever. I'm saying none of these things prove either side is right or wrong, but isn't it, if you would say me and Nick Fuentes, two of the most prominent critics of Israel in the country, and they're both telling you there's no evidence here, and you go, well, that's proof that they both got the phone call. You're like, isn't it more likely the opposite? I mean, I'm not saying that alone proves anything, but isn't it more likely that it's yeah, there's just not enough evidence here? But part of the thing that I think a lot of people are kind of missing here is okay, but if you just jump on a theory with no evidence to back it up, how does that look when the dust settles? Do you think about that at all? I mean, number one, I just wouldn't want to do it because I think it's wrong. But on top of that, also you got to think about how's this thing going to age? That's all part. We're all constantly building our track record. Everybody is, in their personal life, in their public life. You're always building your track record, and you want to think about that too. There will, guaranteed, right-wingers, there will be a time in the next decade where you want free speech. You want that to be on your side. You are better off having a track record of being consistent and principled in that realm, or you're never going to be able to reach people who care about being reasoned and principled. And to me, it's oh, that's what I'm all about. Those are the people I want to reach. And I just think that's something people should keep in mind here. It just doesn't help anything, especially when they're all dying already. And look, as I've said before, I think essentially what happened here was this really was the market. Like, this was Jimmy Kimmel just, look, let's just say it like this. There was a much bigger cancellation attempt on Joe Rogan than there was on Jimmy Kimmel. It was much more organized, much more central, with celebrities, Neil Young saying he's going to take all his music off of Spotify and all this other stuff. But Joe Rogan didn't get canceled because Joe Rogan's numbers were massive. Now, Jimmy Kimmel didn't have any of that protection. In some ways, I think this was the market, but the FCC threatening the shit out of them and then essentially taking credit for it afterward kind of robs you of that victory. It is as if the ref started threatening one team and then after the game started bragging about how they really cheated and won that game. Well, what's that doing for the side that won? That's not helping you. That's robbing you of your victory. And so, I don't think it's as simple as some people are making it out, that it's like, well, Jimmy Kimmel's just a guy. He's just a comedian telling a joke and people shouldn't get fired over telling a joke or something like that. It's like, no, there's a little bit more to it than that. He consciously made a decision to join the regime and to be a spokesman for the regime. And at the same time, you go into a war zone, you pick up a rifle, you're a combatant now. It does not matter if you are officially a member of that military or not. You pick up a rifle and you start marching toward an opposing army, you're fair game now. And in the same sense, you made yourself part of the regime. I don't care about this on a moral free speech issue level. I don't. This is the realm of strategy now. And in the realm of strategy, I think this is all wrong. I think right-wingers are much better off if they just publicly say, we don't want the government involved in this at all, but we're all turning off, Jimmy Kimmel, which the thing is you guys already have. I don't know. I just saw a report on the numbers. The numbers were so bad, dude. This podcast is doing better than Jimmy Kimmel's show was. And believe me, I do not have a contract like Jimmy Kimmel. This thing, he was already losing. Just something to think about. Something for all you guys to play with. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you guys on Monday. Peace. Episode of Part of the Problem. I am Dave Smith. He is Robbie the Fire Bernstein. How are you this morning, sir? Or this afternoon?
I'm doing well. How are you, my friend? That was awesome. Had Tucker on. Big week.
Ooh, yeah, it was a big show. It's been a big week. And of course, I think this is another big show today, Rob, because of course, last night was election night. And there's so much to say about this. And I there's no one I'd rather sit down and break it down with than you, Rob. This was, let's start with this. This was a big moment in American history last night. That was, first of all, Mamdani's victory is a historic victory, no matter how you feel about it. This is a big deal. The fact is that we are in a rapidly changing country with rapidly changing political dynamics. But the fact that, in open socialists, a socialist, Muslim, young, charismatic guy just became the mayor of the biggest city in America is a very big deal. So we're going to talk a bunch about that, obviously, and what this means. Also, the bigger picture of the election, undeniably, was that the Democrats had a good night. And this wasn't a midterm election. It wasn't the House and the Senate and a bunch of states on the line. It was a small off-year election. However, there were three very big races last night. There was the governor, the gubernatorial races in Virginia and New Jersey, and there was the mayoral race in the biggest city in the United States of America. All three of them went the Democrats' way. All three pretty handily. And that's a good night for the Democrats. And a good night for the Democrats is a huge story right now. And, I would argue a concerning one. But, obviously we give our opinions on this stuff, but just breaking it down as an analyst, the Democrats were a year ago today at the worst place I've ever seen one of the major two political parties in my lifetime. I don't think anyone could really argue with that. Look, I wasn't alive during Watergate, but even during Watergate, man, like they still had a Republican president and they had won 49 out of the 50 states in the previous presidential election. There's really the humiliation of the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, disaster in 2024, and the humiliation of Donald Trump having been, the person that they launched more arrows at than any other person, coming in and beating them again. The Democratic establishment has been in ruins ever since then. Their approval ratings have been like 24-25%, just absolutely doing as bad as a political party could be doing. And they had a good night last night, and that's something they desperately needed. So that's a big deal already. So yeah, that's the just the factual what happened last night. It was a good night for the Democrats, and it was a historic night for Zohran Mamdani, who is now going to be the mayor of New York City. And there's a lot in there to break down. But I don't know. You can even lead us off here, Rob. Any thoughts on any of these races last night?
I think there's a lot going on. Off the bat, I will say that these are all fairly Democratic areas, so I don't know that you would have seen a Republican victory. From what I was digging into, I guess these were outsized Democratic victories, and the fact that Zohran, an absolute socialist, was able to win is incredibly concerning. I think what this speaks to more than anything is Donald Trump cannot just Jedi trick go, no inflation, jobs are great, my policies are great, and just keep repeating it over and over and trick people into that everything's amazing. And we're kind of, it's still great that on the national level, the Democrats have nearly no bench and they are worse than Donald Trump. But Donald Trump is in every war. He's trying to get us into more wars. His tariff policy, at least at the moment, hasn't brought prosperity. I still don't think we've seen the worst of it. But there's nothing he's doing that feels like it's America first. I mean, we're seeing it more than anything with what's going on with you, Tucker, and everyone else, as you guys are just anti-war, and the right tries to shame you guys out of the movement as if you don't represent the majority of the country right now. But I think the Republicans are failing incredibly. They're getting the blame for the shutdown, which usually the Republicans are the ones shutting it down and they get the blame. But for some reason, that's not working well for them. And I think it just speaks to Donald Trump's just lying of it's going to be great is easy when you're on the outside. But when you're on the inside and you're actually in charge, you're making the decisions and people don't see it being any better. It doesn't help if you just try and lie to them like Biden and go, no, there is no inflation. No, there is no problems. Yeah. Everything is better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, and because I want to be reasonable with this, and I have said this before, particularly about the Mamdani situation, but let me just reiterate it once again now that he has officially won. Even though that seemed like it was clearly going to happen. And he, he won handily too. He even beat the spread. So there's no talk that, that Republican guy is the reason why Cuomo lost. But Mamdani being the mayor represents many people's failures, including mine and yours. Like, I'm not absolving us from this.
I'm not accepting that.
Well,
I accept zero responsibility for this. I did everything I could to shame Cuomo. The fact that guy came back and the Democrats allowed him to.
No, I more just mean that any of us who have been, arguing for sound economics and free markets and all of this, I feel like, goddamn, I've been on a lot of big platforms over the last few years, and I guess I have not convinced enough people.
People took more vaccines and drank more fluoride than you and I could have ever expected. And, you can only reason with them so much.
Yeah, but look, I'm being very serious here. Like, I've been, look, obviously we take less responsibility. We're not as important as, but I just mean that it's us, it's every other libertarian podcaster, it's every conservative commentator, it's every institute and think tank. It's like, hey, Cato and Mises, and I mean the organizations that I love, the Mises Institute, the Libertarian Institute, all of Conservatism Inc., all of the Republican Party. What a goddamn failure. You have been essentially probably nothing has kept what America's the broadest of broad, big tent, conservative right-wing world since the end of World War II. The thing that has been the lone consensus issue has been anti-communism, anti-socialism. There was a, there was a split between like the Cold Warriors who wanted to fight communism globally, militarily, and the more non-interventionist right-wingers who thought that that might turn us into too much of a communist country if we go and try to create government programs to fight communism. But the one thing that united all of them was being opposed to this, being opposed to socialism. And so if you look at all the effort, 60 years of effort, and at the end of that, the biggest city in the country elects an openly socialist candidate, I'm just saying that's a failure on everybody's part. Like we did not make the argument convincingly enough, or making the argument convincingly enough isn't really what it's all about, and there's some other path. But that being said, well, look, it also, of course, Mamdani being elected also is a result of the failures of the establishment of the Democratic Party, obviously, right? It's that the fact that Cuomo was in such a weakened position that he can't even look at essentially a communist kid and go, get out of here, man. The adults know what they're doing here. Like that, the fact, like how bad would you have to be the son of a governor, the former governor, like a guy who had every advantage he's been in New York City before Mamdani was I was going to say a citizen, but that's like not even close. Before Mamdani was a thought, he's been in the city since before Mamdani was alive. And he's got, all the connections to the establishment. I mean, just huge advantages. But he did such a bad job that he couldn't even convince New York voters that, like, look, you really want to go with a guy who has no experience, who's been a citizen for 5 minutes, who's preaching communism? That's who you want to go with? You have to fuck up really, really bad for the average person to go over you. Yes.
Well, when you put up a guy with a beret and a person who killed people's grandmothers, and then you got to govern New York and you start making it a referendum on having more support for Israel, you're choosing to lose. Now, as to why this kid came out of nowhere, generated so much excitement, and people are so dumb that they're voting for socialism, I think I mean, it speaks to people's stupidity and their belief in government to provide them free stuff, and just candidates, even like Donald Trump, that are willing to speak to the working class and go, hey, everyone else is stealing from you. I'm going to try and make it better.
Well, look, I mean, there's no question. All of those things are factors. Now, look, Rob, had they had more time, maybe they could have asked him to visit Israel one more time. Maybe that would have been enough, but there was only so many times you could ask him to visit Israel, and it just none of it. So look, there's a failure all around here, and I'm not even passing the buck. Like, I'll accept some of the failure here. God damn, we really got to convince this next generation that socialism is like not what they want to embrace. It's going to be a goddamn disaster. It's guaranteed to be a disaster. And in fact, it will be exactly as disastrous as much of it is tried. Like, that will be exactly how much of a disaster it is. But look, to the thing, and you got at it right away, and I think actually we should spend quite a bit more time talking about this. But the biggest failure, right? Like, in the same sense that, like, I'd say, like, even the Mises Institute, I'll put some of the blame on, right? But then obviously who takes so much more of the blame is Conservatism Inc., because you guys actually had all of the backing and all of the budget and all of the numbers and everything, and still couldn't deliver this message, and still couldn't convince people that freedom beats despotism. That was the task, by the way, was convincing people that, like, you getting to be the author of your own script is not preferable to some bureaucrat being the author of your destiny. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Proton Drive. If you're tired of big tech snooping through your files, switch to Proton Drive. It's end-to-end encrypted cloud storage trusted by over 100 million people worldwide, so only you can access your photos, work, and personal files. It's free to sign up and supports our show when you do it. Check them out. Proton Drive, much safer and more secure than other alternatives. If you're interested, we have a link in the episode description. You can click on that and go check it out for yourself. And yeah, Proton Drive, a more secure way to store your photos and files. All right, let's get back into the show. Like that, anyway. So in that same spirit, look, the Democrats having a good night here. And yes, Rob, you're right. These were, I mean, you know, look, they were Democrat favored areas. I don't know if I'd quite say Democratic strongholds outside of New York City. The previous gubernatorial race in New Jersey was substantially closer than this one. And Virginia is okay. Like, I mean, Obama carried Virginia and stuff, but like, it's not California. Like, I don't know. Like, and especially, I got to say, in a year coming off of the humiliation in 2024, and the Democratic Party having an approval rating in the 20s, and after COVID, and after Joe Biden, and after Kamala Harris, I don't know, is it that wild to think like, hey, Republicans, if you get your shit together, you could be competitive in Virginia? Because they weren't competitive. They got blown out. And I'm sorry, this is a failure of the Trump administration. Let's just be honest about this. And what the hell is the point in not being honest about that? And Rob, you know, I think you laid out a lot of the things there for sure. I mean, look, let's just say it like this. Donald Trump came into his second term. He's about a year in, right? A little short of a year in his second term. He came into it with his record high approval ratings, the highest approval ratings he had ever had. Donald Trump had, in what was kind of an unthinkable way just a couple years earlier, Donald Trump had flipped everything around. He had won the day. He had taken back the culture. He had taken back the moment. He had his highest approval ratings. UFC heavyweight champions are doing the Trump dance after they win. He's with Rogan and he's with Theo Vaughn and Andrew Schultz, and he's like recaptured this thing. He has his best electoral performance by far of the 3 times he's run, gets the most votes, finally wins the popular vote, wins every single swing state, wins the House, wins the Senate, has the Supreme Court, you know, perfectly. And now, less than a year later, this party that was in the dumps has a solid night, outperforming where they had been in these states in the last few years. And Donald Trump is right back to his approval ratings being in the gutter. I mean, this whole thing, look, and look, to your point, I don't think, obviously we're all somewhat tempted to kind of like put our own, to as everybody in this world is, you're always kind of tempted to seek confirmation bias and to find out that the answer here is that I was already right about all of this stuff. But I'm sorry, if you're just trying to if you're looking for just sober analysis here, right? All 3 of the big 3 races from last night, which is the governor of Virginia, the governor of New Jersey, and the mayor of New York City, all 3 of them, the winning candidates, centered their campaign around the unaffordability crisis. All of them. In other words, Rob, it's still about the same thing that it was always about, which is the economy, and more specifically, that the price of everything is outrageously high. It's still... And so essentially, for all the other distractions, Donald Trump could sit here and try to spin it in whatever way he wants to about how wonderful everything's going. But the truth is that, you know, the CPI says what? We were like a little over 3% or something like that year to date. It's like, okay, so what that means to the regular person is that all the pain of the Biden inflation plus more. Things are more expensive now than they were during the worst of the crisis of the Biden administration, right? So that essentially, now the government, of course, because, you know, they have government math and DC, economists, and they'll try to spin this in a million different ways. But what it actually means, right? Like, as we always say, right? The CPI is like, which forget the way that's calculated, but prices in general, it's the increase in prices like gaining weight. It's not, oh, well, it went up by 4% last year, but 3% this year, so we're down 1%. No, it's not. We're up 7%, or actually more than that if you do the compound math or whatever. But the point is that things are worse. The same crisis is still there, but is even worse now. And guess what? I'm not even saying that people have been like completely persuaded by our arguments on foreign policy, although more and more of them certainly have been. But like, no matter how much you want to brag about bombing Yemen or toppling the Syrian government or backing Israel as they attempt to kill every last man, woman, and child in Gaza, or bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, or bombing, boats off the coast of Venezuela, but any of this shit, no, what has that done for America? Any of it? Like all of this investment, the right wing being totally split over all of these fights over foreign wars. None of this is doing anything for the America First agenda. None of this is doing anything for making life better for Americans. And look, by and large, you can just look at this stuff. The tariff policy has been incoherent and frankly somewhat unhinged. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, and there's a lot of just like the bullshit is back, and there's a lot of talk about all these different things. There's a lot of interviews where he's calling someone fake news or doing whatever. But like, when it comes down to it, on the issues that really matter, the American people are not seeing some night and day difference. They're not. Essentially, you had a golden opportunity, but you really haven't delivered that much. And look, though, even the one area where Donald Trump really has delivered the most, undeniably, is the border, and the border being under control. But mass deportations haven't happened. There's been a lot of noise about them, but they really haven't happened. And I guess, and maybe this is somewhat unfair, but I think in a lot of ways, while people are glad that the flow of migrants isn't what it used to be, now we're just living with the results of all those millions of people coming in under Joe Biden. And it's not as if they're being removed. So we're just accepting that, like, okay, that happened to us and this is our country now. That's the best we can do, is like, okay, I got the bleeding to stop, but you're going to have to live with the wound. Okay, that's not like the best sell. The fundamentals of the economy are exactly the same, Rob. All of the problems, the major fundamental economic problems are all the same. We're debasing our currency to continue to essentially monetize the debt at a snail's pace or something like that, essentially just slowly destroying our currency to deal with the fact that we have a government that's way too big for us to be able to afford it. We're still getting involved in all these foreign conflicts. We still, just all the fundamental problems are still there. And at the end of the day, when people are going to vote, the fact that Bobby Kennedy told us to stop taking Tylenol just isn't that great of a win, man. Like, what do we really have here? And so for all of the people, because it really is, this is I'm somebody, I was talking about this with Tucker, Rob, but like so many of, say, like the more establishment Republican types who they really want to cancel Tucker or get people like me to just go away. And they're like, no, the real concern is the Democrats. You guys are always picking on the Republicans, but the real concern is the Democrats. So unlike them, I think I actually believe that a lot more. I'm very concerned about the Democrats actually getting back in power on a national level. But take a look at, if you are really concerned about that, then last night should be a big wake-up call for you. This party was so down and so out and so fucking stupid and talentless and destructive, and you allowed them back into the game. That's a fucking failure, if anything is a failure.
And just speaking about allowing them back in the game, of course, Donald Trump has the absolute worst way to deal with this, which is he wants to get rid of the filibuster, because he's now under the mindset of, hey, the Democrats are going to come back unless we can strong arm them. And I don't think Donald Trump's just strong-arming policies is exactly that favorable with the American people. I think that's what gets him the pushback of the No Kings protest. It's what, not that I care about what liberal media has to say, but I'm just saying if you're trying to win over the moderates and your preach is that, you can make things better and that you can govern, and then your only way to try and enact your policies is trying to just ram it down everyone's throats while claiming that it's going to save us and that it's wonderful and that it's great. And we're not seeing any of this pay off yet, while you just continue to spend money, not just on current wars, but escalating other foreign wars. I don't know. It just seems like such a train wreck. And speaking to your point of like, if you don't want to lose to the Democrats, you gotta ramp down on your foreign policy stuff and start actually fixing the economy. And part of that is not having government spend as much as it is as you're trying to increase spending.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's right. That's right. And look, it's interesting in a way too, because you do see there is, as you mentioned, like you mentioned this earlier, and I guess I was particularly on this show, given what our last episode was to this episode, it's hard to not talk about this, but, and I'm not saying that this accounts for like 100% or even like a huge percent of what happened last night, but even just on the optics alone, the fact that there's like kind of a civil war on the right, and then at the culmination of that week, the Democrats have this success. That is something that's hard to not look at. And of course, and I suppose with some level of like surface plausibility, both sides of this divide on the right can blame the other one for it. Hey, if you just got on board with me, we wouldn't be divided. You know what I mean? And we'd be united against the enemy or something like that. But of course, you could do that from either side. It's the same way as like Mamdani ended up winning by enough that it didn't come down to this argument. But that so many people, Cuomo supporters were saying this Republican guy should drop out. Then the Republican guy is saying, hey, I'm the Republican. You lost the primary. You should drop out. Again, at the same point, Mamdani could have dropped out and endorsed Cuomo, and then he'd be the mayor now. But like, whatever, that's not exactly, you could look at it from any perspective. But to me, and I think there's a reasonable point here to be made, let's almost examine all of these cases. I mean, is it true? Let's just say that Tucker and me and Candace and Nick Fuentes, or for everyone, let's just say everyone on our side, we had just shut up and gotten on board with the Trump agenda. We didn't like it under Biden, but as soon as Trump came in and started, back in Israel's war against Gaza, we were on board, and we didn't criticize him for bombing the Houthis, and we didn't criticize them for bombing Iran or any of these things. And we were like, let's go get Venezuela. Let's just say we were totally on board with him. Does anybody really believe that like that would have moved the needle or something, that like the people in these blue or purple states would have been like, well, all right, Tucker Carlson's not complaining about the wars, so let's go vote for Trump? Or would the realities on the ground be exactly the same as the realities on the ground right now? I think that question pretty obviously answers itself. And I would just say, like, look, at this point, again, if you think about who, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess maybe someone could check me on this, but I think of the biggest right-wing political commentators right now, I think Fuentes might be in the top 3 with Tucker and Candace right now, like the ones who are doing the biggest numbers on their shows. And the goal of the GOP coalition is to what? Cancel all 3 of them. Like maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe they're 3 of the top 5 or 3 of the top 4 or something like that, but they're about as big as anybody. And you want to cancel all of that. You want to kick out all the votes. And then, when you get down to whatever, us and, like there's a lot of other people, like you're talking about like picking a battle with like a huge portion of the constituency here. And then I would also, just like, let's say you are one of those guys who's just like, look, what's important. Cause if you think about that, that whole conference thing that me and Tucker were talking about with all the worst people speaking there, their whole thing was saying Trump is not MAGA. And they're like, hey, MAGA is gonna, be ruined by this. And their argument would be something like, hey, Tucker, gave too softball of an interview to Nick Fuentes, and that Nick Fuentes is a neo-Nazi, and therefore regular people are going to be turned off by this. This is going to fracture our coalition. And if we really want the MAGA agenda of whatever, restoring economic health and strong borders and blah, 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 whatever, then we need to get those guys out of here. It's like, all right. Well, even if you have that attitude, and probably more so if you have the Matt Walsh attitude, where he's like, I don't even care about this right-wing infighting. I just want us to all fight the left together. If you want the MAGA agenda, right? Well, you got to admit that at least part of this, the way that Donald Trump was able to win the way he won in 2024, like what was different than the years where he lost the popular vote? And the year where he lost the election in 2020, and all the legitimacy of that election questions aside, but there's no question that like 2016 was like a coin flip. Like it was like a few thousand votes in key districts that ended up winning him the presidency against Hillary Clinton. Joe Biden was much closer. This year he won the popular vote. He won every swing state. Well, what made that? What was the difference there? Well, okay, a big part of it was that, look, use the comedy guys as an example. He didn't have fucking Rogan and Theo and Schultz and all these guys, those type of guys endorsing him last time. He had all of them this time. And think about that. How do they all feel about Donald Trump now compared to a year ago? Not as good, I mean, I don't know like exactly. I know that they've all at different points. I've heard Rogan say this isn't, and I'm all not saying anything privately. I'm just saying what we've all like on their shows, what they say publicly. I've heard Rogan say, fuck, this isn't what I voted for. Fuck, that's not what I want to do. Well, this makes no sense. I've heard Theo be like, say to the vice president, but like, we're back in a genocide still? Like, I don't know. I was kind of against all that. I've heard Schultz say, this is the opposite of what I voted for. I've heard, and what is it? Why is it, right, that Donald Trump was really popular, even on this show? I ended up supporting him. Why is it that Donald Trump was so much more popular in all these circles a year ago until today? Why is it? It's the wars. It's Israel. That's why. There's a price to going all in on continuing Joe Biden's policy of funding the genocide of the Palestinians. There's a price. You lost all these guys over that. So even those people in the MAGA agenda, again, Rob, it all comes back to like what it always almost like comes back to. It's like, which one do you care about more? And people say it's like, oh, you're making it all about Israel or all about the Jews or something like that, which is retarded. It's like, no, dude, it's all about empire, right? That's what the whole thing is always about. It's republic versus the empire. That's what it's always about. It's like it's liberty versus tyranny. It's the people versus the rulers. It's the empire versus the republic. And part of supporting Israel right now requires the empire to continue. It's not the only thing, but it's a big one. And so like essentially, like in a sense, the choice was, do we want to have this MAGA coalition win, or would we rather make sure we get Israel all the weapons it needs? And it seems to me that the choice was made. And I don't think you could say that this is me making it about, what I want it to be about or seeking my confirmation bias. But you explain to me why Theo Vaughn isn't big on Trump today and he was a year ago. What do you think it's over? It's like everybody, it's like fucking, when you listen, I said this to Tucker the other day, but when you listen to Mark Levin talk at his goddamn festival, you would think everything except the destruction of Gaza has been a major factor in how people act about Israel. Why, like you're Mark Levin, Rob. I go, why is anti-Semitism rising? Yeah, it's Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, liars. Oh, okay. Why? Why are the liars resonating with everybody? Qatari money is coming in here. It's everything else. It's everything except you guys just committed a genocide in 4K and forced me to pay for it. Everything except that. And so the idea that you can go, oh, we'll just keep doing that and funding that policy and also keep the MAGA coalition together. Well, maybe you can only have one. Let's see which one a lot of people would choose. Anyway, any other thoughts, Rob?
I think people really care about things starting to be better here And if you're spending money across the globe and you're picking fights and you're funding these wars, it's not going to be better. And speaking now to this lie about that Venezuela is over drugs, you know, you can bring down fentanyl use in this country is if you get some jobs for all these people. I bet if they could have good jobs, I bet a lot of these people wouldn't actually be on fentanyl. You know, it's like, what, you're going to spend more money on these wars? You're just going to keep alienating other countries? You're going to on off with tariffs, trade deals? How many small businesses have been crushed from this stuff? And just speaking, like, I think the wars are partly that people don't like them. And then I think they also just don't like, why are we spending all this money in other places? Can we just focus on getting this country cleaned up? And I think there's just a lot of throw the bastards out. Kamala Harris and Biden could not have been any worse. And so everyone's like, we can't have that. And so Trump had a free permission slip to kind of go and do whatever he wanted to do. And thus far, what he's done is continued all the wars, stirred up a lot of drama on tariffs, continuously told us best, greatest, like, it doesn't matter what the hell he says at this point. If it's not better, nobody gives a shit. And when are these tariff jobs coming in? All the tariffs that you did, when are there going to be lines around the block for factory jobs? What, 20 years from now? When people actually build the factories? When is that happening? So I think just between, I think all of these areas that one might have actually have gone to Kamala Harris. These were Democratic areas, but I think the extent of the victory showcases an outrage with Donald Trump. And I think to the extent that he just continues like everything is great, they will get crushed in the midterms.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. And no, I mean, look, again, I'm not even saying that, like, well, look, obviously a Republican winning the mayoral race in New York City, no, that's happened before, but like, it was going to be a long shot under current dynamics. Obviously Jersey's a blue state. You'd think Virginia should be a competitive state for the Republicans at this point, but I'm talking about more like, there's the trend that even against, look, okay, New York City, again, New York City had a Republican mayor up until, what's his name? Goddamn awful, worst mayor in New York City history. Up until de Blasio, it had been Republican mostly for a stretch there. I think Bloomberg left the Republican Party and became an independent at one point, but he won as a Republican. Giuliani obviously was a Republican. Now, look, obviously it's going to be a lot harder for a Republican to win today than it was for Bloomberg. But Rob, I mean, running against Cuomo and Mamdani, the Republican put up 6% last night. I mean, a truly pathetic showing. Pathetic. The candidate for Jersey, he was the same guy who ran last time, did substantially worse this time than the last time he ran. And in Virginia, again, it was like a 25-point smackdown. Like there was not even a competitive race in what just objectively should be a competitive state for Republicans. And frankly, I'll say, given how bad the Democrats have been, it's just state the Republicans should win. And so, no, it shows something. And again, you know, to your point, there are just these fundamentals on the ground. And the fundamental problem that we have in America is that the economy is a completely rigged game, rigged against the working people on behalf of the powerful. And this is now, you know, when Mamdani or when socialists talk about this, again, it's almost like, you know, it's like Mark Levin talking about why there's this rise in anti-Israel sentiment. Like, it could be everything except the obvious thing. That's why it is. All you got to do is talk to anyone about anti-Israel sentiment who has it, and they'll explain to you very quickly what it is. But we're going to pretend it's anything except that. And so in the same way that Mamdani or Bernie Sanders, whenever they get at it, it'll always be like, you know, the top 1% have so much and everybody else has so little. And you go, okay, well, why is that? Because the greed of the top 1% of it's like, okay, but how do they facilitate that through their greed? Well, you know, they lobby Congress and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, they lobby Congress to do what? And then maybe they'll get into something to be like, oh, they cut their taxes. But then now we're down to a math question. Do tax cuts explain the transfer in wealth? Let's look at it. Oh, no, it doesn't even kind of come close to it. Now, does it? Where were the big transfers of wealth from the working and middle class to okay, it was after the bailouts of 2008, and it was after the lockdowns and the bailouts, right? So look, the fundamental problem here is that you got a government in Washington, D.C. that spends about $7 trillion a year. It's $7 trillion a year that's yanked out of the real economy and given to cronies. And then the entire rest of the economy is this kind of Wall Street casino system that's all run off low interest rates and fiat currency. What has Donald Trump done to solve any of those issues, Rob? Has Donald Trump even pretended to grapple with one of them? Oh, what's he done? Oh, he's increased it. He's increased government spending and asking for more. And so look, it's just like the fundamentals on the ground are like, we have to reject empire and reject big government in order to fix any of these. And Donald Trump isn't even prepared to even rhetorically do that. So yeah, you could sit there and keep talking about how when you decided to change the tariffs because Canada said something about a Palestinian state, that was really a brilliant economic move or something, but nobody's seeing it. Nobody's seeing it. The problem is still the same problem. There's unaffordability. This is how Democrats are, labeling it. But what is that, Rob, other than just saying the same thing we've been saying, except just for 20 years instead of for 6 months, which is that you're destroying the currency. That's the way someone who understands economics would put unaffordability. You're debasing your currency. Things aren't actually, yeah, go ahead.
And the Republicans have a bit of a conceptual problem of combating socialism as they want to spend more money, as they want lower interest rates, and as they're pushing for more socialized medicine, more Medicaid access. Like they've kind of just given up the entire argument. So if it's just the game of your joke of, oh, I'll make minimum wage 20, I'll make it 40. Hey, I'll make things free. I'll make more things free. So the Republicans are not winning a conceptual battle about why socialism isn't good, all the way down to Donald Trump's central planning of trying to bring you more U.S. manufacturing jobs. So, if the Republican Party kind of stands for more central planning and you got another guy who's telling you, hey, I can make even more things free, it's a tough argument to win.
Yes, because the argument is now between central planning or central planning for you. That's the only difference now. Now it's going like, hey, the government will go do a bunch of shit, and they're going, the government will do a bunch of shit, one of which will be paying your subway fare. Like, oh, okay. Well, I like that one because at least I get my subway fare paid for. And I do think that all of these things, like even like say like the Epstein stuff. Now, I'm not saying that obviously I don't think I think most voters vote over inflation much more than they vote over Epstein. The price of your health care and your groceries and immigration and, schooling and stuff like this are much more important to most people than Epstein. But think about something like Epstein. Think about how much damage that did to lose Trump so much energy and favor with so much of the, like the people.
It sends a heavy signal that Donald Trump is not cleaning up corruption. And I think people are aware of the fact that corruption is why they don't have the economic opportunity that they're looking for. And so once again, that cedes more area to the socialists, who I don't think most voters are so much bought into the philosophy of socialism, or that they prefer socialism. They just go, this is a rigged game, and this guy's promising to steal stuff from me.
Yeah.
It's like Robin Hood almost.
Right. Well, at least he's addressing a concern that might be one of their concerns. And, as Tucker Carlson said on our last episode, and I think he's absolutely right about this, the thing here, and I guess what is really the tragedy to some degree in all of this, is that a true America First message could be a really big tent. This is a message that can win you national office. This is a message that could actually win you huge swaths of the left as well as the right in America. Just like the starting point being that it's like, hey, the role of the U.S. government ought to be what's best for the American people, period. and not what's best for the world, not what's best for other countries, not, none of the, now that, if you had a real message that was just like, hey, like, we are not wasting resources on foreign wars of choice that we do not have to fight. And we are not going to have a wide open border, and we are not going to continue debasing our currency. And we are not, like, a thing like that could have huge mass support. But the reason, and look, among so many of the people who, amongst the Trump supporting Zionists, so many of them almost would get on board with that, except we got to support Israel. We saw almost so many of them got on board with it up to Ukraine, Rob. They were still even riding with Ukraine, but Israel, it's a whole different story. We can't not support them for the exact same reasons that I just argued we not support Ukraine, because we can't afford to. And I mean, look, you got, if you just think about the promises, right, of so many of the promises. I don't know why I always see it's kind of like the Alex Jones was right phenomenon. You see all the times that people say Alex Jones was right, and it's like, well, what about all the times he was wrong? And they're like, we're not going to get into all that. I always see the promises kept. That's a big thing Trump supporters like to put, promises kept. And they're like, okay, what about all the ones that were broken? I mean, I'm sorry. I remember he said he was going to end the Ukraine war on day one. Now, look, we all knew that was a little bit of a goofy promise, but like, okay, whether it's his fault or not, didn't deliver on that. Epstein files didn't deliver on that. What was all this Kash Patel stuff? You remember all the stuff Kash Patel promised, Rob? I don't remember any of them being, we're going to bring down Chauncey Billups. And I'm okay. And I'm like, oh, that's great. There was a betting ring in the NBA. Okay, I'm really glad we got to the bottom of that one. And you can only just not deliver on so much before people will recognize that. And I also do think that, I think that Trump's kind of cult of personality and Trump's charisma, and just the, included in that charisma is how goddamn entertaining Donald Trump is, how funny Donald Trump is, how much funnier he made the whole political circus and all this theater. I think that is fading to some degree. And I think that, at a certain point, it's like people were so furious with the establishment, and then they loved that the thing that they could throw Donald Trump at them, the biggest middle finger to the establishment. And you could watch as he made them so angry. And I think that was so satisfying for so many people, And I'm still an immature, angry teenager at heart. I still have these, I said on the last podcast, and I meant it when I said it, that I go like, that Ben Shapiro was calling Ron Paul a vicious anti-Semite. And I was like, good, now you get Nick Fuentes. It just makes you like root for vengeance against that person. And that's all good and fun. But I think as time goes on, and as it gets a little bit less new and fresh and more kind of played out, people, what's still there is that people were furious at the establishment to begin with for reasons, not just because they felt that way. There were reasons, and none of those reasons have none of that's actually been solved. And this is something I would say almost like almost like as a message to other people who do what we do, like to the other political commentators. And I bring this up, I swear, I'm really not bringing this up just to be like petty or to brag about me or something like that. But I saw, and I just saw this, was it yesterday or earlier today? But so I had gone on, I went on Steven Crowder's show about a week ago. And I don't know if you saw any of that, but I went on and I argued with Steven Crowder. And look, I mean, I just personally, I thought it was just like, I thought it was kind of dumb. I as soon as it was over, I was like, well, that was a waste of time. Like, it was just kind of stupid. I thought it was very bad faith and kind of just like low IQ on his part. Like it felt like it was like an MSNBC kind of gotcha style. Like he basically just kept harping the whole time on how I called for Trump's impeachment. And I had said Donald Trump's a war criminal. So that was like the whole thing. So, well, you say Donald Trump's a war criminal. I don't say Donald Trump's a war criminal. Oh, it sounds like you like Obama more than you like Donald Trump. Like that was just the angle to go at me with. And I don't know. I just, it felt like the Josh Hammer debate a lot where I go, I guess that's the best argument you have. I guess the best job Josh Hammer could start with is be like, hey, everyone here, you like Trump, right? And then they go, yeah. You go, this guy doesn't like Trump. I do like Trump. You don't like Trump. And I actually did call Crowder out at one point for it. Where I just went, I was like, all you guys, all you neocons always like are trying to, Ben Shapiro names me for the first time ever only after I call for Trump's impeachment, because you're all trying to be like, oh, look, this guy is against Trump because now you think you can like win the social psychology of the argument or whatever. And I did point out that all of you neocons were the original never Trumpers. At one point I asked Crowder, I was like, who'd you support in the primary in 2016? And he was like, Carly Fioroni or whatever. It's like, okay. So like, whatever. But I was just making the point, and I argued with him on all the topics. And I was like, yeah, dude, I'm not here to just kiss Trump's ass, And I guess when I was done with it, I was just like, oh, that was kind of stupid. And then a friend of mine was like, dude, have you seen the comment section? And I hadn't. And I just went onto YouTube, and this is on Steven Crowder's channel. He's got 5 or 6 million subscribers on his YouTube channel. It's like he's one of the biggest online conservative commentators of the last 10 years for sure. And I mean, dude, he's just getting eviscerated in his own comments. Like even Steven Crowder's audience is like, dude, we're not just blindly supporting Trump anymore. Like actually, this guy had an argument and all you had was, but you're not team Trump. All I'm saying is I think people should, I don't bring any of that up to, whatever, who cares? It was like a dumb segment on a show. The point is just that it almost reminded me of even like going to Charlie Kirk's event and the crowd is so much more on my side than they are on Josh Hammer's side, or going into Crowder's audience. And even the crowd there is just like, no, dude, like we're like a major thing is changing here, and just doing the old tribal partisan bullshit is not going to that's not going to be enough to meet this moment. In other words, the point is, in other words, it's not good enough to just fall in line with the Republicans. You got to actually have something that you stand for. You have to actually believe in something, and you have to actually have something that you could tell people like, no, this is what the problem is. This is the crisis you're facing, right? And here's the solution for said crisis. And so if we just fall in line with the Republicans, that doesn't mean, oh, now we have this big tent MAGA coalition. That means you're going to lose for sure. Like you'd have to actually be for an America First agenda or you're going to lose. And that is something we should worry about because, man, we don't want to live through President AOC. Now, do we, Rob?
I don't know how people on the right can't be getting sick of Donald Trump's most wonderful, greatest, no one's ever seen, and then, doesn't pull through on anything. Can't ever give a reason, can't ever explain where he's coming from. And I don't know how anyone can't just be sick of that shenanigans.
And just the erratic kind of nature of it and the incoherence. And, again, Donald Trump, he'll go down as a monumentally consequential figure in history, one way or the other. And I think perhaps Donald Trump was just like a necessary thing for this country. It was a thing to like break up the matrix, and he was like a one-man trust buster. Like he was just shattering monopolies, and in every sense, like who had a monopoly on information, who had a monopoly on the news, who had a monopoly on education, who had a monopoly on your own mind. Like just he shattered a lot of things. He provoked a reaction out of the establishment that probably no one else ever could have. But he had these fundamental core promises to Donald Trump. And look, obviously, we're not even a year into his second term now. We'll see what happens going forward. But we've gotten almost 5 years of him being president now. And in terms of being hilarious, in terms of trolling the media, he gets like an A+. I give him an A. In terms of sealing up the border in his second administration, I'd give him an A. But on his major, when they say promises kept, well, like the major fundamental problems were like, or excuse me, the major fundamental promises were like, we're going to drain the swamp and I'm going to deliver winning. And he gets an F on both of those. I mean, what the swamp is as swampy as ever. And everybody who ever knew that a swamp existed knows that even if you just arrest Bolton and Comey, that doesn't actually clean up anything, right? And in terms of winning, I mean, his last administration, he left us with Anthony Fauci and the year of lockdowns. And this administration is leaving us with higher spending, more wars on the precipice, evidently, and a higher cost of everything than the last guy had. That's going to be that's going to be very tough to hand off to the next candidate. And as far as like the whole split over the last week on the right, I just think it's interesting. Obviously, I always argue from the position of what I think is right and what I think is best for the country and what I think is the correct policy. But if they even just want to have this fight over what's popular, it's like, well, look, man, I mean, we're not going to have a figure like Donald Trump to take on the Democrats in 2028. It's not going to be the guy who was the most famous man who ever lived, who's the most like charismatic and just kind of alpha male who just sucks all the energy out of the room and becomes the focus of everyone's attention, who's got billions of dollars in the bank. That's not going to be the next candidate. There is no one else like that. It's going to be somebody, whether it's J.D. Vance or God willing, if it was Thomas Massey or if it was Vivek Ramaswamy or if it was any of that, this is going to be somebody who's never put together a national winning coalition like this before. Now, they could do that on a true America First message. They could put together that coalition that carries the hardcore Trump base and gets people like us and Rogan and Theo Vaughn and Tucker Carlson and all these guys, right? Like you could put together something where all of those people are on board. Or you could run on neocon policies, which are been universally rejected by the American people, that no one's for. And that is obviously the path to hand the election to the Democrats. And I'm sorry, but like that, it seems to me like it's pretty stark. Like that is the choice here. You could either get on board with an America First agenda, or we can lose to the Democrats. I don't see any way that we win without that. I'll give the final word to you, Rob, and then let's wrap up.
Yeah, Trump's got some problems lurking because apparently, I mean, he somewhat attributed this loss to the fact that the government shut down. They got a nice little hostage situation going in that the services that are already not being offered are things like people's food stamps. It's healthcare going up, and then it's like even services that I use. Apparently, there's a lot of delays at the airport. He had to get a private individual just to pay military salaries. It's incredible to not be slashing other government spending and fixing the budget so that you can find the money for these things that would be the last things you'd think government would cut. Like if you came down to the last $1 billion in government and decided where it was going, or the last 10 or 20, whatever, $100 billion, these would not be the first things anyone who's with a rational mind would be slashing. I'm not saying I agree with food benefits.
No, of course.
I'm just saying if I had to decide what I was taking away, it's not the first thing on my list of things I'm taking from people. He's also got the Epstein storylines lurking, and that people in Congress were trying to look into that, and then he almost got lucky with the shutdown. And then, of course, just the fact that he's looking to increase spending overall and looking to ramp up some of these wars. Conversations about Tomahawk missiles in the Ukraine, conversations about, I guess, an invasion of Venezuela. Not sure what the plan is there. Supposed ceasefire in Israel that's still standing, and an Iran war being over, while they're also saying that they're going back to nuclear facilities. So anyways, you know what the solution is? You come out to Porch Tour, because I haven't plugged it yet. It's the last run. It's the last run of Porches. Jacksonville this Friday, Savannah on Saturday, Sunday doing a day drinker in Charleston, and then the day before Skankfest about 40 minutes outside of New Orleans. I'm doing a show. And that's it basically for Porch Tour, except for a one-off in Denver and some other scattered dates. But that's basically the end of Porch Tour. So come on out, www.porchtour.com. Grab the tickets. Last chance to see a lot of these jokes.
Hell yeah. All right, guys. We'll be back. We got another big episode this week. Plus, we got a members only that we'll be doing tomorrow. So yeah, look for that. All right. Catch you guys next time. Peace.